He told her she was nothing, a burden, that she and his own children were holding him back. And on that stormy night, he believed his own lie. He threw his black wife and their newborn twins out of his mansion, convinced she'd come crawling back, broken. What he didn't see was the billion-dollar fire he just lit inside her. Picture this moment. Rain hammering against expensive windows like nature itself is trying to break through the facade. Inside that mansion, a woman's hands move with tender precision, braiding her daughter's hair with the kind of love that money can never buy. These are hands that have soothed midnight tears, changed countless diapers, and held together a family that never wanted her in the first place. These are also hands that, unknown to everyone in that house, have been building an empire in the shadows. Then the violence begins. Not the kind that leaves bruises you can photograph. This is the violence of rejection, of casual cruelty dressed up as practicality. A suitcase hits wet pavement with a sound that echoes like a gunshot. Inside it, everything she's allowed to keep from 3 years of marriage, 3 years of biting her tongue, 3 years of making herself smaller so they could feel bigger, 3 years of being the perfect wife to a man who saw her as a temporary inconvenience. Derek stands in the doorway of his family mansion, his face carved from ice and entitlement. This is a man who has never been told no in his entire life. A man whose mother taught him that some people are simply born to serve and others are born to be served. He looks at his wife, the mother of his children, standing in the rain with their twin babies, and he feels nothing. No remorse, no second thoughts. Just the cold satisfaction of a problem solved. In his mind, she'll be back in a week, maybe 2. Desperate, apologetic, willing to accept whatever scraps he deigns to throw her way. The babies are crying in their car seat, confused by the chaos, by the rain, by the sudden absence of warmth and safety. They don't understand why their father won't look at them. They don't understand why their grandmother stands behind him with that satisfied smile, like she's finally won a war she'd been waging since the day her son brought home a woman who didn't look like their country club friends. And then there's Maya. Freeze this frame in your mind. Her face in the rain, water streaming down like tears she refuses to actually shed. There's devastation there, yes, the kind of heartbreak that comes from having your worst fears confirmed. But look closer, look at her eyes. That's not defeat you're seeing. That's not the face of a broken woman. That's calculation. That's resolve. That's a woman who has just been handed the greatest gift anyone ever gave her. Absolute freedom from the weight of their approval. They wanted her gone. She was about to disappear, all right. But when she came back into view, they wouldn't recognize her at all. He threw away a $300 million woman. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For 3 years, Maya Caldwell endured the silent humiliation. Let me tell you what 3 years of psychological warfare actually looks like, because this wasn't a marriage. This was a masterclass in making someone feel invisible while standing right in front of you. The microaggressions at dinner tables where every opinion she offered was met with patronizing smiles and swift topic changes. The condescending comments wrapped in concern, like when Derek's mother would say things like, "It must be so overwhelming for you, coming from your background into all of this." All of this, as if wealth was culture, as if money was breeding. The constant, relentless feeling of being less than in her own home. Less educated, though she had her MBA. Less sophisticated, though she spoke 3 languages. Less valuable, though she was the only one in that house who actually understood what a balance sheet meant. They measured her worth in her silence, in her willingness to shrink, in how well she could pretend that their subtle cruelties didn't land like precision strikes. But here's what they missed while they were busy looking down their noses at her. While they were looking down on her, she was looking at market trends. While they sipped champagne at parties celebrating money they didn't earn, she was studying the patterns in emerging markets. While Derek's father bored dinner guests with stories of deals from the 1980s, she was identifying the opportunities of the 2020s. While they counted her out, she was counting her millions. This is not a story about revenge. Let me be crystal clear about that, because what Maya did goes so far beyond revenge that calling it that would be an insult to her genius. Revenge is emotional. Revenge is reactive. Revenge is what people do when they're still giving their oppressors power over their emotions. What Maya orchestrated was something far more profound and far more devastating. This is a masterclass in silent power. This is what happens when you underestimate someone who has been paying attention to everything you thought she was too simple to understand. And if you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told you're not enough, if you've ever sat at a table where people spoke about you like you weren't there, if you've ever been judged before you even opened your mouth, if you've ever had to work twice as hard for half the recognition, then you need to watch every second of this. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't fiction. This is the blueprint. This is the roadmap. This is proof that your silence isn't weakness. It's strategy. What she built in secret will shock you. We're talking about an empire constructed in the margins of her life, in the hours when they thought she was sleeping, in the moments when they assumed she was too tired or too simple to do anything but serve their needs. She turned their contempt into capital. She transformed their dismissal into determination. She took every single slight, every rolled eye, every interrupted sentence, and she converted it into fuel for something they never saw coming. What she did next will inspire you, because Maya didn't just leave. She didn't just survive. She didn't just build a successful business and move on with her life. No, what Maya did was create a situation so perfectly constructed, so brilliantly executed, that when it finally unfolded, it didn't just change her life. It completely dismantled theirs. And she did it all while they were convinced she was barely capable of managing a household budget. But before we begin, before I take you through every calculated move, every strategic decision, every moment of brilliance that led to their complete and utter destruction, do me one solid. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. I'm serious. Because stories like this, they don't just entertain, they expose truth. They pull back the curtain on what real power looks like. They empower the silent, the overlooked, the underestimated people who are watching this right now, recognizing themselves in Maya's story. These stories prove that karma isn't some mystical force. Karma has a wire transfer. Karma has a paper trail. Karma comes with receipts, financial statements, and a legal team that doesn't lose. And if you want to see exactly how a woman with nothing but her intelligence, her determination, and her absolute refusal to accept their version of her worth turned the table so completely that the people who threw her out ended up begging for mercy they didn't deserve and wouldn't receive, then you need to stay with me, because what happens next isn't just satisfying. It's surgical, it's brilliant, and it's absolutely true. The first test was a family dinner. Every relationship has its defining moments, those early interactions that set the tone for everything that follows. For Maya, that moment came 3 weeks after Derek slipped a ring on her finger, when she was invited, or rather summoned, to the Carmichael family estate for what his mother called a proper introduction. Maya had been nervous, naturally. Meeting your fiancé's family is nerve-wracking for anyone, but she'd also been hopeful. She was an optimist by nature, someone who believed that love could bridge any divide, that kindness could soften any heart, that if she just showed them who she really was, they'd see what Derek saw in her. So she'd spent 2 days preparing her grandmother's famous gumbo. This wasn't just food, this was heritage in a pot. This was every Sunday dinner of her childhood, every celebration, every gathering where her family's love language was spoken through perfectly seasoned roux and andouille sausage that had been sourced from a specific butcher in Louisiana for 3 generations. Her grandmother had taught her the recipe on her deathbed, holding Maya's hands over the pot, making her swear to never let this piece of their history die. Every ingredient was chosen with intention. Every step was performed with reverence. This gumbo had comforted her through breakups, celebrated her graduate school acceptance, and welcomed every important person who'd ever entered her life. She carried that pot into the Carmichael mansion like she was carrying an offering of peace. The house itself should have been her first warning. It wasn't a home. It was a monument to cold perfection. Every surface gleamed with the kind of cleanliness that suggested nothing warm or human was ever allowed to happen there. The furniture looked expensive and profoundly uncomfortable. The art on the walls was the kind that people bought because they were told it was important, not because it moved them. Everything was designed to impress, to intimidate, to remind you that you were in the presence of people who considered themselves superior. And then there was Mrs. Carmichael. Derek's mother swept into the foyer with the kind of entrance that demanded attention, and her eyes found Maya immediately. What followed was an assessment so thorough and so nakedly judgmental that Maya felt like livestock being evaluated at auction. Mrs. Carmichael's gaze started at Maya's shoes, traveled slowly up her body, paused at her hips, her chest, her hair, and finally landed on her face with an expression that communicated everything Maya needed to know. This woman had already decided who Maya was before she'd spoken a single word. The look said, "You are not one of us. You will never be one of us. And my son has made a terrible mistake." Dinner was a theatrical production of exclusion. Maya placed her grandmother's gumbo on the table alongside the catered dishes that Mrs. Carmichael had ordered from some French restaurant with a name Maya couldn't pronounce. The contrast was immediate and intentional. Their food was presented with architectural precision on bone china. Maya's gumbo was in her grandmother's old pot, warm and humble and real. Mrs. Carmichael looked at it the way someone might look at a stain on expensive carpet. She said one word, "interesting." The way she said it, that single word contained volumes. It meant how quaint, how ethnic, how utterly inappropriate for our table. And no one touched it. Not Derek's father, who spent the entire meal discussing business deals with Derek as if Maya wasn't there. Not Derek's sister, who kept glancing at Maya with a mixture of pity and second-hand embarrassment. Not Derek himself, who Maya kept waiting for to say something, anything, to bridge the gap, to tell his family about the first time he'd tasted this gumbo in Maya's tiny apartment and declared it the best thing he'd ever eaten. But Derek said nothing. He ate his French food and let the message land exactly as his mother intended. The rejection was on the menu, but it was also in every moment of that evening. It was a message as clear as crystal. Your love is not welcome here. Not your food, not your traditions, not your family's history, and certainly not you. They wanted Derek's wife to be an ornament, a pale reflection of themselves, someone who knew her place and kept it. Maya was none of those things, and they were going to make sure she understood the cost of her difference. But that dinner was just the opening salvo. What followed was 3 years of systematic erasure, a campaign of psychological warfare so subtle that Maya sometimes doubted her own perceptions of it. This is what people don't understand about emotional abuse in privileged spaces. It isn't loud. There's no screaming, no thrown objects, no obvious violence that would give you permission to name what's happening to you. It's quiet violence, a death by 1,000 cuts, each one small enough to make you question whether you're being too sensitive. But together, they form a pattern of deliberate cruelty designed to break your spirit without leaving visible marks. Her opinions on business? Called sweet, as in How adorable that you think you understand these complex matters that are clearly beyond your comprehension. Maya had her MBA from a prestigious university. She'd written her thesis on emerging market strategies in developing economies. She understood business better than Derek's father, whose company was hemorrhaging money using the same strategies that had worked in 1985, but were completely obsolete now. But whenever she tried to contribute to their dinner table discussions about the family business, she was met with indulgent smiles and swift dismissals. That's a sweet thought, Maya, but the real world is more complicated than that. Never mind that her sweet thoughts were exactly what their dying company needed. They'd rather fail than accept advice from someone they'd decided was their intellectual inferior. Her career dismissed as a hobby. Before marrying Derek, Maya had worked as a financial analyst at a respected firm. She'd been good at it, good enough that her boss had begged her not to leave when she'd gotten pregnant with the twins. But Mrs. Carmichael had opinions about working mothers, especially working mothers married to Carmichael men. "Running a household is quite enough, dear," she'd said with that fake concerned face. That tone that pretended to be maternal wisdom, but was actually a command. "You have responsibilities now, to your husband, to this family. Surely your little job can wait until the children are grown." Her little job. As if analyzing multi-million-dollar portfolios was equivalent to a teenager's summer lemonade stand. Her very presence? An inconvenience they tolerated. This was perhaps the cruelest cut of all, because it was the most constant. Maya could feel it in every family gathering, every holiday dinner, every supposedly joyous occasion. She was the wrong note in their symphony of smug satisfaction. When the family shared inside jokes from Derek's childhood, Maya sat silently, excluded from decades of shared history. When they discussed their social circle, people Maya had never met and would never be invited to meet, she was a ghost at her own table. Derek would scroll on his phone when she spoke, literally choosing the digital world over acknowledging his wife's existence. His sister would talk over her, cutting Maya off mid-sentence without even seeming to notice she'd done it. The psychological impact of this kind of systematic exclusion is devastating. Have you ever felt invisible in a room? Not just unnoticed, but actively erased, as if your presence doesn't register as fully human to the people around you. It's a special kind of torture, because you can't point to any single moment as proof of mistreatment. How do you explain to someone that you're being abused by being ignored? How do you describe the violence of being treated as if you're furniture? They never raised their voices. They never called her names. They just made her disappear while she was standing right in front of them. Maya would lie awake at night wondering if she was losing her mind. Maybe she was too sensitive. Maybe she was imagining the cruelty. Maybe this was just how wealthy families operated, and she was too unsophisticated to understand their ways. This is what they wanted her to think. This is how this kind of abuse works. It makes you doubt your own reality. It makes you responsible for your own erasure. But Maya carried two secrets that would ultimately save her. The first was her twin girls, growing inside her belly, giving her a reason to endure that transcended her own dignity. She needed to survive for them. She needed to be strong for them. She needed to build something for them so they would never have to tolerate what she was tolerating. Every kick from those babies was a reminder that this wasn't just about her anymore. The second secret was a steel core forged by a single mother who had taught Maya everything about surviving in a world that didn't value black women. Maya's own mother had raised her alone after Maya's father left, working 3 jobs to keep them fed and housed and educated. She'd taught Maya early that some people would always see her as less and that their perception was their problem, not hers. "Some families don't know how to share their sons," her mother told her during one particularly tearful phone call when Maya was pregnant and exhausted and starting to believe the Carmichael's version of her worthlessness. They think they own him, and anyone who takes him away is a thief. You'll have to be stronger than their smallness, baby. You'll have to remember who you are when they're trying to tell you who they think you are. That night, after another humiliating family dinner where she'd been treated like a server rather than a family member, Maya stood at the window of the mansion bedroom she shared with a man who barely touched her anymore. She was 6 months pregnant, exhausted, and completely alone in a house full of people. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass, and something shifted in her face. You could see the exact moment the sadness transformed into something harder, something dangerous, something unstoppable. She made a vow that night, not just to survive, though survival was part of it. She vowed to conquer. She would take every ounce of their contempt and convert it into fuel. She would use every moment they wasted belittling her to build something they couldn't imagine. She would become so powerful, so successful, so utterly beyond their reach that their rejection of her would become the defining mistake of their lives. They thought they were tolerating her. They had no idea they were creating their own destroyer. Maya placed her hand on her pregnant belly, feeling her daughters move beneath her palm, and she made them a promise too. They would never feel what she was feeling. They would never doubt their worth. They would never accept crumbs from people who should have offered them feasts, and the empire she was about to build would be their inheritance, built on the ashes of the family that tried to erase their mother. The war had been declared. The Carmichaels just didn't know they were already losing. While they slept, she traded. While they vacationed, she invested. Using every ignored moment as fuel, she turned a small inheritance into her first $2 million. This is the part of the story where Maya stops being a victim and becomes an architect of destiny. But here's what makes this remarkable. She did it all while maintaining the perfect mask of the submissive, overwhelmed wife they expected her to be. Picture Maya's life split down the middle like a mirror with two completely different reflections. On the left side, there's the version the Carmichaels saw. Maya folding tiny baby clothes with mechanical precision, her hands moving through onesies and booties, while her face wore that empty smile of someone whose mind is a million miles away. Maya at family brunch, nodding politely, while Mrs. Carmichael droned on about the proper way to discipline children, the right preschools to consider, the importance of maintaining the Carmichael reputation. Maya playing the role of grateful wife, incompetent outsider, woman who barely understood how to balance a checkbook, let alone build an empire. But on the right side of that mirror, there's the truth. While Derek snored beside her, Maya's face was illuminated by laptop glow at 3 in the morning, her eyes tracking lines of code and financial charts with the intensity of a surgeon performing open-heart surgery. While the family vacationed in the Hamptons, congratulating themselves on their generosity in including her, Maya was in her room running calculations, identifying market inefficiencies, spotting opportunities that institutional investors with their Harvard MBAs and legacy admissions were completely missing. The seed money came from an inheritance from her grandmother, the same grandmother who'd taught her that gumbo recipe they'd rejected at that first dinner. $25,000. To the Carmichaels, that was what Derek spent on a watch he wore twice. To Maya, it was ammunition. Most people would have put it in a savings account, let it sit there earning 1% interest, while inflation slowly devoured its value. Maya saw it as the first domino in a chain reaction that would change her life forever. She started small, deliberately under the radar. While Mrs. Carmichael was lecturing her about the importance of thank you notes and proper table settings, Maya was teaching herself quantitative analysis. While Derek's father was boring dinner guests with stories about business deals from 40 years ago, Maya was studying the patterns of emerging markets, the behavioral economics of consumer tech, the way that social media was creating entirely new categories of value that the old guard couldn't even perceive. Her first investment was in a small biotech company, that was developing a promising treatment for autoimmune diseases. She'd found it through research she'd done during her pregnancy, trying to understand her own body better. The company was pre-IPO, risky, the kind of investment that made financial advisors nervous. But Maya had done her homework. She'd read every clinical trial result, every patent filing, every interview with the research team. She saw what others missed. This wasn't just a promising treatment, it was a revolutionary one. She put $10,000 into it. 18 months later, when the FDA approved their drug, that $10,000 became $75,000. And that was just the beginning. Maya had a gift that the Carmichaels, with all their inherited wealth and prestigious schools, could never understand. She had hunger. She had the clarity that comes from having nothing to lose. She had the perspective of someone who'd been counted out so many times that she'd stopped caring about following conventional wisdom and started trusting her own analysis. She found her partner and friend Elise at one of those mind-numbing charity events that Mrs. Carmichael insisted Maya attend. Elise was working as a server, putting herself through law school, and Maya recognized something in her eyes. That same fire. That same determination to be more than what people assumed she was. They started meeting in coffee shops, these secret sessions where Maya would bring her laptop and Elise would bring her legal expertise, and together they would plan. Not just investments, but a structure, a company, an empire. Caldwell Ventures was born in a corner booth of a 24-hour diner, while Derek thought Maya was at a prenatal yoga class. Elise handled the legal paperwork, creating a web of LLCs and holding companies so complex that even if someone went looking, they'd never trace it back to Derek's supposedly simple wife. Maya provided the capital and the vision. Within 6 months of the twins being born, while Maya was supposedly overwhelmed by motherhood and barely able to keep the household running, Caldwell Ventures had a portfolio worth $400,000. Her nights funded their future. Every hour that the Carmichaels spent sleeping soundly in their beds, secure in their superiority, Maya was building. She learned to function on 4 hours of sleep. She would nurse the twins, put them down, and then open her laptop. She traded Asian markets while America slept. She identified companies in Africa and South America that were solving real problems for real people, the kind of investments that her business school professors had taught her about, but that the Carmichaels' wealth managers would never touch because they weren't traditional. By the twins' first birthday, Caldwell Ventures was worth $1.2 million. Maya celebrated by smiling emptily through another family dinner where Derek's father complained about how hard it was to find good help these days. By their second birthday, she'd crossed 2 million. She celebrated that milestone alone in her car, parked outside a grocery store, tears streaming down her face. Not from sadness, but from the overwhelming realization that she'd done it. She'd built something real, something that was hers, something they could never take from her. The Carmichaels never saw the birth certificate. They never suspected that the woman they pitied, the woman they treated like an inconvenient obligation, was worth more than most of their country club friends. Maya made sure of it. She wore the same modest clothes. She drove the same practical car. She never mentioned money, never hinted at financial knowledge, never gave them any reason to look beneath the surface of the role she was playing. But then came the discovery that changed everything. The final piece of the puzzle wasn't a business deal. It was her husband's credit card statement. Maya wasn't snooping. That's what made it almost funny. Derek had asked her to grab his credit card from his wallet to pay for takeout, too lazy to get it himself while he watched football in the next room. She'd opened his wallet and a receipt had fallen out. Just a piece of paper, the kind of thing you'd normally ignore. But Maya had been trained by 2 years of building a business to pay attention to details. The receipt was from a jewelry store, for a necklace that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a necklace Maya had never received. Her hands had gone cold. Her heart had started that slow, dreadful pound that comes when you know you're about to confirm something you've been trying not to suspect. She'd gone to his laptop while he screamed at the television about a bad call. His password was easy. She'd seen him type it 1,000 times, and then she'd opened his credit card statements, and the entire architecture of lies revealed itself like a blueprint. Monthly payments to an apartment Maya had never heard of, jewelry purchases, restaurant bills, weekend getaways to places Derek had told her he was going for work. Her hands were shaking as she clicked through months of evidence. And then she found his messages. He wasn't even careful about hiding them. Why would he be? He thought she was too simple, too overwhelmed with the babies, too grateful for his family's acceptance to ever question him. The other woman's name was Cassandra. She worked at his father's company, some junior executive position she'd probably gotten because she looked good in designer suits and laughed at old men's jokes. The messages made Maya physically ill, not because of the affair itself, though that was devastating enough, but because of what they revealed about how Derek actually saw her. "Once she's gone, we can be together," he'd texted Cassandra. "I just need to wait until the twins are old enough. Then I can divorce her without looking like the bad guy. She'll be fine, she's low maintenance. Probably just move back to wherever she came from. Low maintenance, like she was a car, like she was the appliance. 3 years of marriage, 2 children, and this is what she was to him. A temporary inconvenience, a mistake he was planning to correct." Maya sat in front of that laptop for 3 hours, methodically screenshotting everything, every receipt, every message, every piece of evidence. Her legal training from Elise had taught her to think like a lawyer, document everything, build an airtight case. The humiliation that had been slowly poisoning her for 3 years had just become a weapon, and Maya knew exactly how to use it. What would you do with proof of every lie? Most people would confront their spouse. They'd cry, they'd scream, they'd demand an explanation. Maya did none of those things. She saved every file to an encrypted cloud drive that only she could access. She organized the evidence chronologically. She created a folder labeled Exhibit A, like she was preparing for trial, because eventually she would be. And then she closed the laptop, deleted the browser history, and went back to playing the role of the oblivious wife. Because Maya understood something that Derek and his family never would. The best revenge isn't hot, it's cold. It's not reactive, it's strategic. It's not about making yourself feel better in the moment. It's about completely destroying your enemy so thoroughly that they never recover. She had the evidence of his betrayal, but she needed more. She needed total victory. And over the next 18 months, while Derek continued his affair and the Carmichaels continued their subtle cruelties and everyone thought Maya was barely keeping her head above water, as a struggling mother, she was engineering the most brilliant trap in modern financial history. With her empire worth $50 million and climbing, Maya executed her masterstroke. She had a mentor by then, a man named Richard, who'd made his fortune in hostile takeovers in the 80s and had retired to teach business strategy at the university where Maya had gotten her MBA. She'd reached out to him through a cold email, not expecting a response. But Richard had seen something in her analysis of a struggling pharmaceutical company that impressed him. They'd started meeting monthly, then weekly. He became her secret weapon, teaching her not just how to build wealth, but how to deploy it strategically. Together, they identified the vulnerability in the Carmichael empire. Mr. Carmichael's company, the source of all their pride and smugness, was dying. It had been dying for years, bleeding money through outdated business practices and terrible management decisions. To stay afloat, they'd taken on massive debt. $42 million in debt, secured against the company's assets. Debt that was held by a consortium of lenders who were getting nervous about repayment. Maya and Richard approached these lenders through a shell company called CV Holdings. They never mentioned Maya's connection to the Carmichaels. They simply made an offer. We'll buy this debt at a discount. You get your money back now, guaranteed, instead of waiting and hoping the Carmichaels can turn things around. For the lenders, it was an easy decision. They sold the debt for $38 million. And just like that, with one transaction that the Carmichaels knew nothing about, Maya became her father-in-law's creditor. She now owned their future. She controlled whether the company survived or collapsed. She had the power to call in that debt at any time, to force the sale of assets, to dismantle piece by piece everything the Carmichael family had built over generations. Richard had looked at her after they closed the deal, this grandfatherly man who'd seen every kind of business warfare imaginable, and he'd smiled with something like pride. "You know what you've done here?" he'd asked. Maya had smiled back. "I've become inevitable," she'd answered. And while this trap was being set, while the financial noose was tightening around the Carmichael empire's neck, the family was having brunch. They were laughing about some inside joke. They were planning their summer vacation to Martha's Vineyard. They were discussing which prestigious kindergarten the twins should attend, as if Maya's opinion mattered. Mrs. Carmichael was giving Maya advice about hiring the right nanny, about maintaining her figure after children, about all the small ways a woman should make herself acceptable to society. They were completely unaware that the ground was crumbling beneath them, that the woman they pitied was holding the detonator to their entire existence, that every dismissive comment, every condescending smile, every moment they'd treated her as less than human, was about to be repaid with interest. Maya sat at that brunch table, nodded politely, smiled her empty smile, and thought about timing, because she had all the pieces in place now, the financial leverage, the evidence of Derek's affair, the legal structure that Elise had created. She could destroy them any time she wanted. She was just waiting for the perfect moment, the moment when it would hurt the most. The moment when the irony would be so perfect that they'd spend the rest of their lives understanding exactly what they'd lost, when they decided she wasn't worth their respect. That moment was coming soon. Maya could feel it like a storm building on the horizon, and when it broke, it would wash away everything the Carmichaels thought they knew about power, about class, about who deserved respect and who didn't. Her knights had funded their future. Now her days would determine their ending. They called it being civilized. The family meeting happened on a Tuesday evening, precisely the kind of timing that revealed how little they actually considered Maya's schedule or needs. Mrs. Carmichael had sent a text, not a request, but a command. "Family meeting at 7. Be prompt." Maya had fed the twins early, laid out their pajamas, and walked into that formal dining room knowing exactly what was coming. She'd known for weeks, actually. Derek had been sloppy, leaving his phone unlocked, his conversations with his mother visible for anyone who cared to look. They'd been planning this, rehearsing it, deciding together how to dispose of the problem they'd never wanted in the first place. The room was staged like a tribunal. Mr. Carmichael at the head of the table playing patriarch, Mrs. Carmichael to his right, her face arranged in an expression of pained disappointment, like she was about to do something difficult but necessary. Derek's sister was there too, trying to look sympathetic but unable to hide the satisfaction in her eyes. And Derek himself, sitting as far from Maya as possible, unable to even look at her. That should have been her first clue about how thoroughly he'd been broken down by his mother's manipulation, but Maya was past caring about Derek's spinelessness. Mrs. Carmichael started with the script they'd prepared. "Maya, dear, we need to discuss your future, and the girl's future." The use of "we" was deliberate, excluding Maya from the decision-making about her own children. "It's become clear that this arrangement isn't working. You're overwhelmed. The girls need stability, and frankly, you need to think about what's best for them, not what's best for you." The cold accusations came wrapped in concern, each one a precision strike, designed to make Maya doubt herself. She wasn't bonding properly with the children. She seemed distant, distracted. Several people at the club had commented on her appearance, her inability to keep up with social obligations. There were suggestions, never quite explicit, that perhaps Maya was struggling with her mental health, that perhaps she wasn't fit to be a mother, that perhaps the kindest thing, the most civilized thing, would be for her to step back. Let the Carmichael family, with all their resources and stability, take primary custody. Give Maya a chance to find herself without the burden of full-time motherhood. Derek said nothing. His silence was its own form of violence. This man who'd promised to love and protect her, who'd sworn vows in front of their families and God, sat there mute while his mother systematically dismantled his wife's character and competence. Maya looked at him, waiting for him to defend her, knowing he wouldn't, but needing to see for herself just how completely he'd abandoned any pretense of being her partner. Then came the financial offer, and this is when Maya almost laughed. Mr. Carmichael slid a folder across the table. Inside was their proposal. Maya would receive an allowance of $5,000 a month. She could see the girls on weekends, supervised visits, of course, just until she got her life together. She would sign papers agreeing that she had no claim to any Carmichael assets. In exchange, they would provide her with a small apartment and cover her basic expenses. They were framing it as generosity, as them taking care of someone who clearly couldn't take care of herself. "You have nothing without us," Mrs. Carmichael said, and there it was. The truth they'd been dancing around for 3 years, finally spoken plainly. In their minds, Maya was nothing, had always been nothing, would always be nothing. They were offering her an allowance like she was a child who'd misbehaved, and they expected her to be grateful for their mercy. That's when Maya smiled. Not the empty, placating smile they were used to seeing. This was something entirely different. This was the smile of someone who's been playing chess while everyone else thought they were playing checkers. This was the smile of a CEO holding 4 aces in a poker game where everyone else had bet everything on a pair of 2s. This was the smile of inevitable victory. She stood up slowly, gathering her dignity around her like armor. She looked at each of them in turn. Mrs. Carmichael with her sneer of superiority, Mr. Carmichael with his patriarchal entitlement, Derek with his cowardly silence, his sister with her schadenfreude. She let the moment stretch out, let them think they'd won, let them believe that her smile was some kind of nervous breakdown. Then Maya spoke, and her voice was calm, clear, and absolutely certain. "You're going to wish you had been kinder." That was all she said. 7 words that they didn't understand but would remember for the rest of their lives. 7 words that would haunt them in the dark hours of their financial ruin, their social exile, their complete and utter destruction. She walked out of that dining room, went upstairs, and packed a single suitcase with essentials for herself and the twins. She'd already moved most of their important belongings weeks ago, storing them at Elise's house, planning for this exact moment. She carried the twins down the stairs, their car seat in one hand, her suitcase in the other. The family was still in the dining room, probably discussing how well that had gone, how reasonable they'd been, how they'd handled an unpleasant situation with grace. Outside, it was raining. Of course it was raining. The universe has a sense of drama. Maya strapped the twins into her car, then stood there for a moment in the downpour, looking back at that lit mansion. Inside those walls, she'd been erased, diminished, treated as less than human. But she was walking away worth nearly $200 million, with full legal custody about to be granted, with the power to destroy everything they held dear. The rain washed over her, and she felt baptized, reborn, free. Inside the mansion, they popped champagne. Maya knows this because Derek's sister posted about it on social media later, before hurriedly deleting it when the lawsuit started. They actually celebrated. They toasted to family, to doing the right thing, to protecting the Carmichael name. They congratulated themselves on handling a difficult situation with class. They had no idea that in walking away from Maya, they'd just sealed their own fate. She walked into the storm and into her destiny. They walked into the beginning of their end. The courtroom hearing happened 6 weeks later. Derek's lawyer was exactly what you'd expect. An expensive suit filled with old money arrogance. The kind of attorney who wins cases because judges recognize his name and his connections rather than the merit of his arguments. He presented Derek's case with absolute confidence. Maya was mentally unstable, he argued. She'd abandoned the family home in the middle of the night without warning. She had no visible means of support. She was unemployed, living with a friend, clearly unable to provide the kind of stability that children need. The Carmichael family, in contrast, could offer everything. The best schools, the best healthcare, a stable multi-generational home, financial security that extended into perpetuity. He painted Maya as a gold digger who'd trapped Derek with a pregnancy, lived off his family's wealth, and was now trying to extort money through the children. He actually used that word, extort. The implication was clear. Maya was a certain kind of woman, from a certain kind of background, and everyone in the courtroom should understand what that meant without him having to say it explicitly. His casual racism was expertly calibrated, just subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability, while ensuring that every person in that room understood that Maya was other, was less than, was not deserving of the benefit of the doubt. Derek sat at the plaintiff's table, looking appropriately concerned, playing the role of devoted father, being kept from his children by an irrational woman. Mrs. Carmichael was in the gallery, her face a mask of dignified suffering. They were so confident, so certain that the system would recognize their superiority and rule accordingly. Then Elise stood up, Maya's lawyer, her friend, the woman who'd been building this case with the precision of a master craftsman for over a year. Elise was calm, almost casual in her demeanor, which should have been their first warning. She began by addressing the claims of financial instability. Your Honor, the plaintiff has suggested that my client lacks the means to support her children. I'd like to enter into evidence Exhibit A, my client's financial portfolio. And then the numbers appeared on the courtroom screen. Account balances, investment portfolios, real estate holdings, the value of Caldwell Ventures properly audited and documented. The total figure appeared in bold at the bottom. Maya's net worth was $192 million. The courtroom erupted. Derek's lawyer actually stood up objecting, claiming it had to be fraudulent. The judge demanded order, her face showing the shock that everyone in the room felt. Maya sat perfectly still, her expression neutral, watching as 3 years of assumptions disintegrated in real time. Derek had gone pale, his mouth literally hanging open. Mrs. Carmichael's hand flew to her mouth, her mask of dignified superiority cracking into something that looked like horror. But Elise wasn't done. She presented Exhibit B, the affair, every text message, every receipt, every hotel booking, photos of Derek and Cassandra together, not grainy surveillance photos, but clear images pulled from Cassandra's own social media, because the other woman hadn't even been careful enough to keep their relationship private. The diamond earrings that Derek had claimed were a business expense, now shown on Cassandra's ears in dated photographs. The secret apartment lease in both their names, the planning, the conspiracy, the systematic deception. Then came Exhibit C, the conspiracy to separate Maya from her children. Elise produced text messages between Derek and his mother, discussing their strategy using phrases like, "Get rid of her, and she doesn't deserve them, and we can fix this mistake." She showed how they deliberately tried to manufacture evidence of Maya's incompetence, how Mrs. Carmichael had been spreading rumors about Maya's mental health at the country club, how they'd been setting up a narrative of unfitness for months before the actual expulsion. The judge didn't just rule for Maya, she eviscerated them. Her ruling was 15 pages long and blistering in its condemnation. She granted Maya full physical and legal custody of the twins. She issued a restraining order preventing Derek from coming within 500 feet of Maya or the children without supervision. She ordered him to pay child support based not on his actual income, but on his potential income, since the court found he'd been deliberately underemployed to avoid obligations. She denied the Carmichaels any grandparent visitation rights, citing their demonstrated emotional abuse and conspiracy against the mother. But the most devastating part of the ruling was the judge's commentary from the bench. She spoke about how the court had nearly been manipulated by assumptions about race and class, how the Carmichael family's presentation had relied on coded language and implicit bias, how their wealth and status had almost blinded everyone to their fundamental lack of character. She made it clear that this ruling was not just about custody, but about justice, about correcting a system that too often privileges appearance over truth. It was a very public lesson in humility, delivered in a courtroom packed with people who knew the Carmichael family, who'd read about the case in the society pages, who'd come to watch what they expected to be Maya's humiliation, and instead witnessed her complete and total vindication. Within months, the empire they prized was gone. The social death came first, because that's always what hurts people like the Carmichaels the most. They weren't invited to the charity gala they'd attended for 30 years. The country club, where Mr. Carmichael had been a member since 1975, quietly suggested he resign. Party invitations stopped arriving. Old friends suddenly became unavailable. The people who'd smiled at Mrs. Carmichael's dinner parties now crossed the street to avoid her. Their social death was comprehensive and absolute because wealthy society has one unforgivable sin: public embarrassment. The Carmichaels hadn't just lost a custody case. They'd been exposed as bullies, as racists, as people whose veneer of class couldn't hide their fundamental cruelty. The business death followed quickly. Richard made the call to Mr. Carmichael personally, a courtesy that was really just an opportunity to twist the knife. CV Holdings was calling in the debt, $42 million, due in 90 days. Mr. Carmichael had tried to negotiate, had called in favors, had begged other lenders to refinance, but word had spread about the custody case, about the family's character, and suddenly no one wanted to be associated with the Carmichael name. The company that had been in the family for 3 generations was sold at foreclosure auction for pennies on the dollar. The building that bore the Carmichael name had that name removed. Everything they'd built, everything they'd believed made them superior, was dismantled and distributed to creditors. The personal death was perhaps the most satisfying, at least from a karmic perspective. Cassandra, the mistress who'd been promised a life of luxury once Maya was disposed of, realized she'd hitched her wagon to a sinking ship. The viral video of her throwing a drink in Derek's face at a restaurant, screaming about how he'd lied to her, how he was broke, how she'd wasted 2 years of her life on a fraud, that video got millions of views. Derek became a meme, a punchline, the face of entitled failure. Mr. Carmichael had a heart attack. Not fatal, but severe enough to require surgery and months of recovery. The stress of losing everything, of watching his legacy crumble, of knowing that his own arrogance and cruelty had caused it all, that stress nearly killed him. Mrs. Carmichael developed early-stage dementia, whether from stress or simply age finally catching up with her, and had to move into assisted living. The woman who'd presided over dinner parties and charity events with imperious grace was now confused and alone, her daughter visiting once a month out of obligation rather than love. The money Derek had stolen for his mistress, the money he'd hidden in offshore accounts thinking he was clever, all of it was now evidence in his financial ruin. The IRS got involved. The SEC opened an investigation into the Carmichael Company's books. Every corner they'd cut, every rule they'd bent, every little bit of fraud they'd committed, believing their status made them untouchable. it all came out in discovery. They were left with nothing but the echo of their own cruelty. In quiet moments, in sleepless nights, they must have replayed that family meeting. Must have remembered Mrs. Carmichael saying, "You have nothing without us," to a woman worth $200 million. Must have heard Maya's response, "You're going to wish you had been kinder." Must have understood, finally, that they hadn't been dealing with a victim to be disposed of. They'd been dealing with a force of nature, and they'd made the fatal mistake of underestimating her. The rain that had fallen the night Maya left their mansion had washed away more than just their assumptions. It had washed away their future, their legacy, everything they'd thought was permanent and unshakable. And Maya, walking into that storm, had walked into the life she'd built for herself. The life they'd never imagined she was capable of creating. The life that proved, once and for all, that their cruelty had never been her problem. It had always been theirs. Today, Maya Caldwell's empire is worth over $300 million. Let that number sink in for a moment. 300 million. But if you asked Maya what her real wealth is, she wouldn't point to the balance sheets or the quarterly reports or even the stunning corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the city she now commands. She'd point to something far more valuable, something money can't buy, but peace of mind can protect. Her real wealth is the sound of her daughter's laughter echoing through their sun-drenched penthouse on Saturday mornings. It's Sophia and Emma, now thriving, confident young girls who've never known what it feels like to be unwanted or less than. It's the way they walk into a room with their heads held high, not because their mother taught them arrogance, but because she showed them what true strength looks like. They've watched their mother build an empire from nothing, and they've learned the most important lesson of all. Your worth is not determined by who accepts you, but by who you become when they reject you. Maya's real wealth is the unshakable knowledge that she saved herself. No knight in shining armor, no rescue mission, no waiting for someone to validate her existence or see her value. She looked in the mirror on that rain-soaked night, holding 2 newborn babies with nowhere to go, and she made a decision that would change the trajectory of her entire life. She decided that their cruelty would not define her, their rejection would not destroy her, their underestimation would not limit her. Instead, she turned their dismissal into fuel. She transformed their mockery into motivation. She converted their contempt into capital. And now she sits at the helm of Caldwell Ventures, one of the most successful venture capital firms in the country. Her portfolio includes tech startups that are changing industries, real estate investments that are reshaping skylines, and strategic acquisitions that make Wall Street analysts take notice. She's not just wealthy, she's powerful, she's influential, she's untouchable, but more importantly, she's at peace. Because the empire she built wasn't constructed on a foundation of bitterness or revenge. It was built on something far more enduring, the fierce, unbreakable love of a mother who refused to let her children grow up in a world where they felt small. When Maya has dinner with her business partner and best friend Elise these days, they don't talk about the past unless it's to marvel at how far they've come. They clink glasses of expensive wine and laugh about the early days when they were meeting in coffee shops, plotting and planning while the rest of the world slept. They celebrate the wins, analyze the losses, and dream about the future. Because for Maya, this was never just about proving them wrong. It was about proving herself right. Right to believe in her own abilities, right to trust her own instincts, right to know that she deserved better than what she was given. But every story of triumph has one final chapter that needs to be written. And for Maya, that chapter arrived on a Tuesday afternoon when her assistant informed her that Mrs. Eleanor Carmichael was in the lobby, requesting a meeting. No appointment, no warning. Just the audacity of old money assuming doors would always open for them. When Eleanor Carmichael walked into Maya's office, the contrast was almost cinematic in its symbolism. Here was a woman who had once presided over dinner tables like a queen, who had looked down her nose at Maya's homemade gumbo, who had smiled that tight, condescending smile while systematically erasing Maya from every family conversation. But now she looked small, frail, diminished. The designer clothes couldn't hide the weight she'd lost. The expensive jewelry couldn't disguise the tremor in her hands. Old money was decaying, right there in front of new money's power. Eleanor's voice, once so sharp and cutting, now wavered with desperation. She wanted to see her granddaughters. She claimed she'd had time to reflect. She said she understood she'd made mistakes. She even used the word sorry. Though it came out like a foreign language she'd never quite learned to pronounce correctly. She spoke about family and second chances and how blood should matter more than past grievances. She painted herself as a victim of her own upbringing, a prisoner of old prejudices she now claimed to have shed. But Maya didn't interrupt. She simply listened with the calm, measured patience of someone who had learned long ago that silence is the most powerful response to people who've never truly heard you anyway. When Eleanor finally finished her rehearsed speech, Maya's response was as sharp and final as a judge's gavel. "Your apology is 30 years too late and worth exactly nothing," Maya said, her voice steady and clear. "My daughters will only know people who see their worth, not people who had to lose everything before they could recognize basic humanity." She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Power doesn't shout. It simply states the truth and lets that truth echo in the silence that follows. Eleanor Carmichael opened her mouth to respond, perhaps to beg, perhaps to argue, but Maya was already standing, already walking to the door, already holding it open. The conversation was over. The judgment had been rendered. And as the office door closed on Eleanor's defeated face, it wasn't cruelty that Maya felt. It was closure. They told me I was nothing, so I became everything. And if you're watching this right now, if Maya's story resonated with you, if you've ever been in that room where people talked over you, around you, about you, but never to you, then hear me clearly. Remember this, the deepest rivers run quiet. Don't mistake kindness for weakness. Don't confuse silence for surrender. Your time is coming. Build in secret, plan in silence, and strike only when your victory is already assured. Because the people who underestimate you aren't paying attention, and that inattention is your greatest advantage. While they're laughing at your dreams, you're building the foundation. While they're dismissing your potential, you're developing your skills. While they're celebrating your departure, you're calculating your return. If this story of silent power and undeniable justice hit home for you, then do 3 things. 1. Smash that like button. Let's get this to 100,000 likes and show the algorithm that stories of real empowerment matter. 2. Subscribe and hit the bell icon, because I'm bringing you more stories that empower, expose, and prove that karma doesn't forget an address. And 3, comment below "silent power" and tell me where you're watching from, because I want to know that this message is reaching people who need to hear it. Because Maya's story proves one thing that cannot be disputed. When you underestimate a woman building her empire, you're not just making a mistake. You're funding her victory fund. Every insult becomes investment capital. Every dismissal becomes determination. Every closed door becomes a blueprint for the mansion she'll build herself. I'll see you in the next video, where we're going to talk about another person who turned betrayal into billions. Until then, remember, they're not ready for your comeback, but that's exactly why it's going to be so devastating.